Greetings, Upstanders. Dr. O here, and I was watching the debate with Morning Joe and Dr. Eddie Glaude of Princeton University and other folks who are on the panel as well, talking about crime and all of that. And I really appreciated lots of Eddie's takes as it relates to crime. He said a lot of things that many of us have been saying, just that Trump doesn't give a damn about crime. He just wants control. That he's living in that 1990s mindset. I was just talking yesterday in my post about their desire to want to bring back the crime bill. And, Glaude was talking about him being a black person who has seen the effects of these earlier ideas of just dropping, Scarborough's what random number of 5,000 police on the streets. Now, to be fair, yes, Joe Scarborough as of late has been talking more about the importance of having trained cops who come from the community, who are, and the importance of having other services and the like. I think that comes from having people like Simone Sanders on the show and Reverend Al Sharpton and Eddie Glaude and Mayor Brandon Johnson, who have said multiple times it's not just policing, it's policing and other things. That wasn't where Joe and Mike Barnacle were going in the beginning. And Joe has been changing a little bit of his tone as it relates to that part. Gotta acknowledge that. But one of the things that Joe keeps doing when he gets pressed about this, like he was with Brandon Johnson, or as Eddie definitely did in today's conversation or debate, is that he always goes back to this to black women, and he always goes back to this Washington Post survey where he says multiple times that like 91% of black women in Southeast say that crime is an issue, or 91% of black women in DC, something like that. And then he always talks about Southeast, and then they talk about Anacostia. I never thought, as somebody who's lived in Anacostia for almost 20 years, that I'd ever see Anacostia on national news, but it's like almost daily now. And there's always conversations about us, without us. And I've lived there for almost 20 years, still a homeowner there, and I also work in DC. I don't live in Southeast right now, though I'm there daily, or weekly, I should say. But before this post ends, I'm going to give you the names of three people that, if Joe Scarborough and MSNBC wants to continue to have conversations about Southeast, I'm going to give you three names of people you can actually talk to, all black women who live in Southeast, who are doing their work in their own respective right. I'm going to get to that. But I keep hearing about this survey. And what is this survey? So I go and check it out. He talks about a May 11th survey, right? This survey that Joe keeps mentioning, it was done of, well, where is it? Of 1,667 people. A phone survey of 1,667 people. And in this survey, the majority of black women who are cited in this article, so I'm going to read the post. It says, there are stark divides along lines of race and income in the poll, with black residents and lower income residents. I'm going to put all of this in the bottom for you to go check out yourself. With black residents and lower income residents significantly more worried about crime than white residents and those of higher incomes. That makes sense given the demographics of the city. As they were last year, black women are among the most concerned, with 65% say, not 91%. I don't know where this 91% comes from. He said a May Washington Post survey, so I'm in May of Washington Post. As were among the most concerned, with 65% saying crime is a very or extremely serious issue, compared with 82% who said that the same time last year. So 1,667 people who are surveyed. I don't know how many people of this were black and the like, but that's a very small number of people given all of the people who live in Washington, D.C. So that's one thing. And then, as Eddie Glaude was giving his pushback, he starts challenging Eddie Glaude. Well, basically, I don't know if you're dealing with this living in Princeton and being a Princeton University professor, and you seem to be a little bit condescending to these black women. And then Joe Scarborough says, I don't want to accuse black women of moral panic. And I'm like, well, yo, for real? Whenever there's a cornering of some sort, or a strong challenge, strong pushback, it always goes back to black women and what black women want and what black people want in Southeast. And as Eddie made the strong point, as we know that the National Guard wasn't coming to Southeast, they were going to the mall to protect people from Southeast. And then Joe and Mike's article, I said, was like, send those troops into Southeast. Black people in Southeast DC do not want National Guard troops there. Yes, people want proper policing, but people are more interested. And again, there's going to be people who disagree. For Southeast is a big place, right? But what people want more is the services. They want the programs. We want the $1 billion that will cut out from the DC budget to help make crime be a 30-year low in DC. We want those things to happen. But this idea of just sending in the police, it's not going to work. And yeah, we want police from the community. But this idea of Joe continually coming back to use black women to kind of buttress his argument is problematic. And again, this survey, from what I can tell, it doesn't even report to say what he says it says. I just kept hearing it enough that I needed to go and see it. And this idea that Trump, if you just work with Trump, if you just thank cops, give cops a raise, sure, give cops a raise, of course, no doubt. But as Eddie made it clear, Trump doesn't care about this. He doesn't care about this. If he cared about it, he would go to Congress and say, give the money back, fund these programs. Not doing that. All he cares about is increasing a carceral state. And so I mentioned earlier that I was going to say, since he mentions black women and he mentions Southeast so much, I want to give the names of three people, because there are many people in Southeast on the ground doing the work. Like I said, a homeowner in Southeast. I'm not going to call myself right now, since I don't live there right now. I'm not going to call myself a community organizer in Southeast. But if these conversations about Anacostia and what Southeast DC wants start bringing people from the community on Morning Joe to actually discuss what black people, especially black women, want. First person I'm going to give you is Dion Bussy Reader. Dion Bussy Reader, go to the LinkedIn profile. Chief Executive Officer at Far Southeast Family Strengthening Collaborative and CEO of DTR Enterprises. DBA, doing business as Dion Goods Food, or at Dion's Good Food. I ran against Dion Bussy Reader in 2018 when we both ran for city council, coming out of Southeast. This is somebody who's on the ground doing the work. If you listen to the interview she talks about parents being scared to death about what's going on. She talks about, people talking about how they're going to protect their sons and daughters from the cops that they may be seeing or the tanks that they may be seeing, and how they're organizing around that. This is what people like her, when I say people like her, a longtime Washingtonian, someone who's active daily on the ground, putting in the work, and is also a business owner in addition to a community organizer. Having someone like her on the show would give an entirely different perspective. How about somebody like Denise Rolock Barnes, who is the publisher of the Washington Informer, which is based in Southeast, which has been, since 1964 or something like that? Since 1964, the Washington Informer has been in there doing the work, speaking on the community. Why not bring this sister up there to talk about what's actually happening in Southeast and to give a larger range of opinion? And of course, we can't talk about Southeast DC and talk about prominent black women without talking about Cora Masters Barry, former wife to Marion Barry, and the work that she continues to do in the community. Over 80 years old, still going strong. You hear her talk, you sound like she's like 55 or something like that. Continued dedication and service in this community. So we have to have this mindset, no conversations about us without us, and stop saying the people of Anacostia are crying. They're screaming for this. They're screaming for more cops. No, they are not. No, we are not. We want responsible policing. Yes, we want community policing. Yes, we want people who come from the neighborhood, but just an influx and a certain. And can we have a conversation about some of these police departments across the country intentionally don't want to hire people from the neighborhood and are intentionally bringing people from other communities who will have kind of an occupying type of mindset? Which is why many people from the community don't want to go into the police in the first place. We can talk about the racism and the hiring practices and the like. You, Eddie, and Joe do not want the same thing. And that's kind of how the conversation ended, but it's really not the same thing. It's really not the same thing. And same to Mike Barnicle as well. It doesn't start with the policing. It starts with so many other initiatives and programs that needs to be what is talked about. So I appreciate where Eddie went with it today. I feel like Joe has been changing his tone a little bit. He says that we've been talking about this for 3 weeks. We've been saying the same thing for 3 weeks and accuse Eddie of not watching the show and all of this other type of stuff, which is it's just not true. I've listened to this conversation every single day, and quite honestly, with the exception of Reverend Al Sharpton, who was there weekly to talk about a lot of other things, but sometimes we'll get into the crime conversation. A lot of the black people who are there to talk about crime don't get brought back to talk about crime. Simone Sanders still comes on the show, but I haven't seen a conversation with her in crime since that first big time they went at it. Maybe I missed a segment here and there, but for the most part, I catch the show every day as I'm going through the news. So those are my thoughts. I'd love to know what you think. I appreciate what Eddie did. And like Eddie said, it's not giving a damn about public opinion and how people are going to look at him on YouTube. It's about framing the conversation properly. And I feel like that's not really done. And I feel like there are real prominent people. And since Joe likes to talk about black women, I gave you 3 black women of different ages, backgrounds, doing incredible work. Bring us onto the show in terms of us, people who have actually been in Anacostia or are still there right now. No conversations about us without us. And I guarantee the conversation will be a lot different as it relates to this mindset of just throwing the police because we're begging for it. It's just not real. It's just not real. Let me know what y'all think. Peace.